beyond just the assets of PV and storage, what are the control systems? What are the software systems for managing these devices? And ultimately, what kind of data and analytics can be gleaned for use of the consumer, the utility in some cases, in other cases, third-party energy service providers. So it's an interesting topic. So the speakers should come on out. Ravi Manghani, who's our newest senior analyst at GTM Research, will be moderating the session. Ravi comes to us from Photon Consulting, where he led market research in both solar PV and storage, so he's very well versed on both topics. And I'll let Ravi take it away from here and introduce our speakers. Thanks, guys, for being here.
Thanks, Rick. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, perfect. So we are here to talk about intelligent analytics for distributed PV and storage. Why are we here? GTM just released our 2Q 2014 US Solar Market Insight report. And for the third quarter in a row, we have 1+ gigawatts installed, 1+ gigawatts of PV installed. And only second time in the history of US deployments, we had over 500 megawatts of distributed PV. That's residential and non-residential behind the meter stuff. And today we are over 15 gigawatts of total operational PV capacity in the US, and things are looking good. On the storage side, not the same order of magnitude, maybe a couple of orders of magnitude lower, but we are seeing a huge spike in the number of deployments and planned projects as well. So as per the DOE database, we are tracking currently over 200 odd, 270 to be precise, distributed storage projects installed or planned. That excludes most of the SGIP projects or small generation program that California has, incentive program that California has. So excluding that, we have over 270 distributed storage projects, and that accounts to over 200 odd, 212 megawatts of storage capacity, distributed storage capacity. Plus, we are starting to see a lot of programs on the, by utilities and PUCs as well to look at distributed storage as a means for resiliency efforts, looking at, upgrade deferrals, demand management kind of programs. So here we are today to talk about, what does distributed PV and storage do, or rather, where does intelligent analytics sit on top of distributed PV and storage? And we have an excellent panel here, come from different areas. Some of them are more familiar with the PV side of things, and a couple of them are more on the storage side of things. So essentially, we are going to sort of, slow jam the topic. We'll be going back and forth on storage and PV both as needed. With that in mind, let me introduce our panelists. Well, I'll just introduce their names and let them speak about themselves for a minute or so before we jump into the questions. Extreme left, we have John Carrington. He is CEO of STEM, followed by Mike Herzig. He is the president and founder of Locus Energy. We have AJ Mudfish, who is leading the utility industry business unit and solutions at Spacetime Insight. And we have Roger Weed from One Energy Systems, leading the VP of Product Management. So that being said, why don't you guys take 30 seconds to a minute to just introduce yourself, and then we'll jump on to the panel.
Sure. John Carrington, as Ravi mentioned, CEO of STEM, effective in December of 2013. Spent several years in the solar business with First Solar, and most recently CEO of Mia Soleil, and then 16 years at GE. For me, STEM was about the nexus of really technology and energy, both topics I was very interested in. And STEM is a company, it's a SaaS-based company that focuses on energy efficiency. We do that via predictive analytics and innovative storage in combination. We have really two goals. One is to save the C&I customer money, as well as help the utility maintain itself on highly congested days, so our fleet of assets can participate in capacity as needed. We're located here in Millbrae, California.
Mike Herzig, president and founder of Locus Energy, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Locus is a monitoring and data analytics provider for the PV industry. We monitor over 45,000 systems, mainly in the United States, and about 750 megawatts. Locus's business is really answering 3 questions for our customers who tend to be either third-party system owners or large EPCs or O&M providers. The first question is, what happened? What did the system do? The second question is, what should have happened? So is there an alert or an alert condition that I need to take care of? And then finally, what does this mean about my system? Is the system operating on an optimal level, or is there something that we need to do to make it better or just add to best practices going forward? So that's the critical function that we provide for our customers. We are based in New Jersey for the corporate office, and our technology headquarters is in San Francisco.
Thanks, Ravi. Thanks for having us on this panel. My name is AJ Mudfish. I work for Space Time Insight. You may have heard of us. We are creating a new path forward as it comes to uniquely using OT data, or the operational data, along with external data like weather data, et cetera, and IT data, to bring them all together in a very cohesive way to create more information. A lot of this data already exists. So we talked earlier on about silos of data. One of the unique things that we do is we use spatial temporal nodal analysis to compute that data, create more information, make it more accessible to an operator or a customer support service agent, and so on and so forth. So my role is I run the utility side of the business, bring together solutions that are required uniquely to the utilities, operate within the framework of their constraints, and still provide them very unique knowledge through analytics.
Great, and I'm Roger Zweed with One Energy Systems. We're a 2 to 3-year-old company that's focused on software that helps utilities control grid-scale energy storage systems. And I'm relatively new to the industry. Most of my background is in the IT industry, with a brief tour through the public sector working for the state of Washington. So maybe on this panel, I'll bring both the control software perspective as well as a relative newcomer to the industry and sort of what I see, coming in with a relatively fresh perspective.
Great, thanks, Rogers. So we're going to have the panel divided into sort of 3 stages or 3 phases, if you may. On the first part, we'll talk about the current state of analytics and relevant sort of capabilities and user use cases. The second part, we'll talk about how the business models are evolving and what challenges we are facing as of today. And the third one is going to sort of look into the crystal ball and see what does analytics for distributed PV and storage look like in 2015 to 2020 horizon. That being said, my first question is for one of you PV guys, or Mike or AJ, feel free to pick. How intelligent is analytics today? When we talk about intelligent analytics, can you talk about how does it enable certain use cases or certain benefits for distributed PV?
Sure. Do you want me to?
Go, please, go ahead.
Great. So I'd look at analytics today as parts of it are extremely intelligent and parts of it are not at all. So it's kind of like you've got a mile deep and you've got pretty wide, but maybe an inch deep. And so I think it depends on where folks have focused in the industry. So for large system setup, the analytics in terms of determining that a system is ready to be commissioned are actually fairly well developed. A lot of the analytics that we work on are more after the system is commissioned. And there are some pretty good analytics for that, especially for larger systems. I'd say that for a lot of the smaller distributed systems, it's still pretty early days in the industry. I think that we're actually, when I look at it in terms of data for solar, we're kind of in the 3rd stage. The first stage was we don't really care that much about the data. We just want to get the systems into the ground or on the roofs. Mm-hmm. The second stage is, okay, now we own these systems. What the heck is going on? And the third stage now is a little bit better questions about how are we optimizing O&M. And I think we're getting into that. So folks are just starting to take a step back and saying, how good are our analytics? And are we using the right tool for the right job? So that was a bit of a high level.
That's perfect. So from the way I think about PV as a source of energy that's being delivered into our distribution grid, the analytics at that level might be good. Now, when you start to get down to the use cases, like you said, it is right now where the money is really in the larger solar opportunities is the way I would put it. Then you think about the PV in front of the meter and behind the meter. I think there's still a lot of art form that's in there. It's not the lack of analytics. It is the maturity of that model itself and how it fits into the overall grid systems is still developing. I think there is technologies already out there that allows you to do the two-way interaction between the PV to the grid and grid to the PV and so on. So I think from a maturation process, the industry is the business value is still a strong need from a PV perspective. I think the future is that there'll be a lot of displacement of traditional generation with PV, and value proposition will start to become bigger and bigger as time passes.
Sure. But have both of you talked about the maturity and the fact that distributed PV or larger PV systems are where current business opportunities are. Yet, if you talk to the utilities, it seems like the biggest headaches are the rooftop installations. Any sense on is that a disconnect between where the business opportunity from your vendor's perspective versus where the utilities want?
Well, I think it goes down to what the utilities want. Utilities for the bigger systems, they can control those systems, they can curtail them. The rooftop, they actually may have zero control, and so they absolutely positively want to know what's going on with those systems, and they may not have that insight, certainly not on a real-time basis, and are very interested in that. I think with the bigger systems, as we said, it fits more within the worldview of, okay, here's an asset, it's coming onto the grid, and we can control it, and we can build that in. Does that answer the?
Yeah, sort of. Moving on to storage, does the answer change, or what's your perspective on how intelligent the analytics is on storage today?
I think it depends upon which aspect of storage you're speaking of. So STEM is behind the meter. We've got a lot of predictive analytics. It requires a substantial amount of analytics. If you're a backup storage device that's utilized in a power outage, that's a little different subset. But I think what's interesting is the combined between, I think PV we just heard has some good analytics. I think there's good storage, but the nexus of the two is the problem. And I think we don't have a good solution around really how do you manage the production of solar in conjunction with the building's load demand. And that's an area I think where analytics is gapping. And we talked earlier before we got here about trying to figure that out together. And it's a big focus for us.
Got it. Rogers, you coming from a
I would actually potentially propose that it's flipped around for storage. Whereas analytics is maybe stronger for PV on the grid side with larger installations and weaker on the residential side. In storage, maybe it's flipped around, and actually on the behind the meter side, the analytics are relatively more developed. On the grid side, I think less so, because the asset is a newer class of asset, and the first generation of software that was controlling it certainly wasn't able to take any analytics from anywhere else on the grid. And I think in general, the ability for different grid systems to talk to each other is more challenging. So I think on the grid side, storage analytics are very early days.
Got it. The second part of my question was about specific use cases. Can one of you address specific use cases that you think intelligent analytics today is able to help solve or generate value for the end customer?
Let me take a crack at that. I think if you look at the ideal case scenario for a distribution grid is it's in perfect equilibrium, right? Everything, electrons are flowing the way they're supposed to be. There's no resistance in the network, et cetera, right? The issues come in when you have all these, what is the ideal flow versus what causes the lack of idealism in there. And part of it is these energy resources that are coming on into the system. So if you solve the problem at that level, at the aggregate level, you can potentially build solutions. But if you take one piece at a time, just storage at a time, or just PV at a time, or just wind at a time, it's tough because you have to offset the intermittency of those PV, wind, and other sources with a storage at that point. So you really look at coupling all of these together, and how the coupled solution leads to a better equilibrium is really the way I think about it.
So I heard from both John and AJ that notion of a systems approach towards analytics. Is that what I'm hearing here?
I think,
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I'll take an observation on that, which is I think a systems level approach in a planning perspective around capital allocation and stuff like that is maybe perhaps a little easier to do sooner. A real-time operation of the entire system in an optimized way, I think, there's a lot of work still to do to enable that kind of thing to happen. So it might be ideal. It is an ideal place to get to. My observation is we've got a lot of work to do to enable that.
Sure, that's what I hear, right? Mike,
I was just going to say, one of the interesting parts of this panel is actually talking about analytics for storage and PV within that systems context. And it's a very interesting question. And before this, we were talking a little bit about where that is today and where it will be. I would say a lot of the use cases, though, specifically today, I mean, there's the future-looking ones, but the ones today, a lot of it's about pricing and asset management, at least within photovoltaics. So on residential, where there aren't a lot of analytics, but they are doing a lot of securitization, securitization will drive better tools, better analysis of those systems. So I would say we're kind of heading in a strategic direction, but at least a lot of the use cases that we're seeing right now are a bit more tactical. I don't know if that matches other folks' views too.
John, any thoughts there?
I think from an analytics standpoint, one of the exciting pieces for us is around the grid services play. And you guys reported out this Olivine PG&E deal we did where it was Highway 92 downtown, and we engaged 4 of our customers to shed 160 kilowatts of energy over a little over an hour period, which was the call, and we engaged 4 customers with behind-the-meter storage to accomplish that. So that was obviously our analytics calling into the fleet, going off the system, monitoring how we were doing versus the baselining that the print PG&E would see. So and Olivine. So it's coming along, but I agree with you, Rogers. There's still work to do.
Great, absolutely. And when you think about the capabilities and use cases, the next question then comes, are there sufficient business models or relevant business models out there? And I'm sure, the 4 of you sitting here means that you made some money that, and probably have something to offer here. How are the business models evolving? In what are you seeing in terms of, the approach towards analytics as a product or a service, and how does that change the business model approach? I can start with you, Mike, again.
Yeah, sure. So where we're seeing, I mean, the good news is, as you said, there are 4 of us up here all coming at it from different angles, and we are starting to see just within our own business an increased focus on not just wanting analytics, but actually wanting to pay for analytics, which is an important differentiation. There's been a lot of interest in analytics for a long time in PV, but a much greater hesitancy, at least for us, in terms of paying for them. And what's driving this is that the stakes are high. So if somebody has 5,000 systems versus 1,000 systems versus 50,000 systems, the value of the analytics, the value of the retained value of that system, if you're Solar City, the value of the securitization is a clear business driver to paying for data such as a virtual irradiance engine to weather benchmark your systems, or a disaggregation tool to really do better O&M and meet your performance targets is key. And this is a lot of it's coming from the folks who maintain these systems. So as I said, I think from a systems level and how it integrates to the grid, that's absolutely coming. But right now it's the folks who've got real dollars on the line. Like one of our customers literally guarantees and escrows millions of dollars per system. And then they use our system and their own internal techniques to make sure that they hit those performance guarantees. And if analytics can give them 1% more accuracy, that's actually real big money. And that's what's driving it now, which is great news. Because before, people said, hey, that's really cool, but we're not going to pay for it this year. And I think it's the payment's happening now.
Great. AJ, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from a touch upon exactly what Mike just said, from an operational perspective, there's a lot more propensity to apply analytics. I think we heard that through the morning and in the early afternoon too, whether you call it as operational analytics or grid analytics. something that has, where there is enough data or rich enough data, clean enough data that can be used to create more optimization. Like Mike said, 1% improvement is a huge improvement at that point in time. So I think from what we are seeing, and all our customers are, can easily justify their spend on the operational side much more so than it does come down to use cases. You have to define a very clear use case that has a business value, and when that business value is realized and they actually focus on finding those business values at that point, I think that's how right now the analytics model is evolving through that process. Find a use case, business model, success.
But then apply it as a service or a product?
So it's both. In some cases where the data constraints are, where data cannot be exposed to the beyond the firewall, we're seeing it to be as applied locally within an on-premise solution. But on the customer side, there's a lot more openness to do this as a SaaS solution at that point.
John, I know we've spoken in the past about this particular topic on how does the business model evolve if it's a product or a service, and how does the pricing sort of follow. You want to share your thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say that, and we've looked at a bunch of different models in the short history of the company, but I think the winning solution is a OpEx versus CapEx discussion. And so for us, we've rolled up a bunch of $100 million of project finance. And the value prop to our customer is it's a lease strategy, 3, 5, or 10-year. We lump the software and the hardware into one payment, but it's a pretty minimal monthly payment relative to their savings. And that seems to be a better model from a throughput standpoint for us than $150,000 for a couple towers.
Got it. Rogers, anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that, with storage in general, we know that there's basically costs and benefits, right? And the battery manufacturers are driving costs down as fast as they can. But the benefit side really has to do with analytics. So I think the storage industry, the vendor side, will push for better and better analytics, because that's how they increase the value of the asset they're trying to sell into the utilities. And so, I think there'll be push from the industry just to build the business case for storage itself.
So would that be done, in your opinion, internally by the vendors, or you see, third-party analytics vendors, in fact, coming in and making a system?
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and I think that for storage that utilities are going to buy and own, it may be that the industry, the vendors themselves have to bring that story to the table. The combination of the system and the software they're selling with it has to plug into the existing grid infrastructure and systems and deliver more economic value out of the box. If the asset is not going to be owned by the utility, then I think that opens up a lot of other, as John is building with STEM, a lot of other approaches.
Got it.
Service, potentially software as a service approach.
Got it. Great. Rogers, we talked about business and about business models and analytics as a product or a service. I know One Energy Systems in particular is also looking at open standards and what the impact of open standards could be on storage deployments. Yep. How does the approach, again, a business model approach, change if you are looking at storage analytics in particular, but DER or distributed energy resource analytics in general? How does the approach change whether we are looking at open standards versus proprietary systems?
Yeah, well, this is one where, coming into this industry, I think the history of it has been a little bit more siloed and proprietary between vendors inside of a utilities infrastructure. And I think if we're going to realize the potential of analytics to optimize utility performance and deliver better value to customers, these systems have to start defining standard information models and standard communication protocols, and allowing the system to get broken up into layers where providers can be world-class at their particular part of the offering. And so we feel very strongly that way about storage, and I think that's a change for this industry. I don't think it's really embraced standards to the same degree that the IT industry has and other industries. So that's one where, coming in, I'm like, wow, I think we've collectively got to get more serious about standards. And I heard the utilities before, there's been lip service to standards. Well, in the IT industry, you have standards like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and internet standards, and people have realized that if they don't adhere to those and implement them to some level, then everybody suffers. The industry doesn't scale the way it should.
Sure. And we've already seen a lot of standards, or at least some efforts on the solar side. Mike or AJ, do you have any thoughts on what does open standards mean for your specific business models, or how you approach providing analytics?
I'll let Mike answer this.
Sure. So, it's a two-part question, obviously. How does standards influence analytics? And I think a lot of what Locus does is help to normalize the very disparate data that we take in. So we must talk to 200, 300 different kinds of devices, mostly inverters, lots of weather stations, string combiners. I mean, it's actually a pretty big part of our investment in the platform. And there's a lot of talk in the industry about standardization, but a lot of the players, especially the dominant ones, may not want to standardize. And then there's a lot that also happens between design and implementation. So one of the things that the industry is going to have to do, and I think this may be where you're going with the question, is to figure out and extrapolate from all that data how we can come up with a simpler data set that's still accurate to provide meaningful analytics. And some of what we do is we provide some, basically just taking irradiance and energy data to provide that analytics. Because I think that the industry is definitely going to standardize, but to Roger's point, it hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't necessarily feel like we're getting there. The industry is trying to do it, but it's a difficult thing. But the key is that the analytic outputs, I think everybody realizes that those need to be standardized. And they are roughly standard. So the idea of expected production, weather adjusted production, those things are becoming standardized, and the models are becoming more standardized as well. But we still have at least 2 or 3 years to go, in my opinion. There's a lot of the vested interests actually aren't pushing for standardization, interestingly.
Just one quick addition to that. There's the network side protocols and standardization.
Right.
So the companies like Locus are trying to drive the standardization of how you model a certain type of inverter, certain type of solar panel. That effort, along with the enterprise side modeling, so for a company like ours, we want to be able to consume data that, irrespective of what the solar panel itself is, so then we are building the optimization models on top of that. So I think, the standardization has to occur in both places for it to be valuable from an analytics perspective.
Right.
It goes back to clean data and so on. Everything is dependent on having a standard set. And I think the industry is evolving, it's just too slow.
Yeah, I mean, 2 to 3 years would be optimistic, I think, but we'll see about
Well, I'm talking about the models.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could be completely off in that because it hasn't moved very fast so far.
John, you want to offer any thoughts on that, or?
I would echo a lot of the comments. There's a lot of legacy building management systems out there. They're very siloed by specific companies that have created them. But I do agree with Mike. I think that ability to have more forward look or the output that's more valuable will change it and open up quicker. A lot of the systems today are a rear view mirror, the systems in place. So I think that predictive nature will become a bigger driver.
Got it. We have 15 more minutes to go, so I'll jump on to the third topic, and then we'll open up the floor for the audience. My third topic was around, looking into the future. What does the roadmap for analytics look like for PV and storage? And we've addressed that in a bit, talking about the solar plus storage combination. Obviously, that's where potentially a lot of analytics could play out. In your opinion, what does analytics roadmap look like in sort of 2 different scenarios? One scenario being, we talk a lot about grid integration, and the second scenario, RMI, coming out with the whole notion of grid deflection. Does the approach or the roadmap of analytics change in either of the scenarios, whether it's an integrated grid or a more dispersed, disintegrated, defected grid? You want to take Mike? Or?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm happy to, because, and I think I was having a similar conversation earlier today. I think that there obviously will be distinctions, and I think that we would be optimistic or pessimistic, depending on which side you're on, to say that the grid is going away anytime soon. But I think that there is a holistic view that this is all going to have to be integrated. I look at it, though, as the tools are probably going to be the same or similar for the most part, because it's a question of, is the asset performing? I mean, that's a key part of analytics. How the batteries and the solar work together, how the storage and the solar works together with the building envelope is also a key part of it. And then one of the big questions is, how prolific will microgrids be, and the analytics around those vis-a-vis the main grid. Because there's a lot of variables.
Right.
I mean, electric cars are going to drive consumption, just as solar may reduce it from the grid's perspective. So I'm pretty agnostic in that view. But I'd say that, say 80% of the tool set will be the same, and 20% of it may be different depending on, how prominent the grid is versus not. That's just finger up in the wind. But that's,
So I'm going to add to what Mike said from a microgrids perspective. One of the, just like we have these evolving stories that take years to come out, microgrid is one of those stories that's been going on out there. But I think right now I see all of the DERs, the distributed energy resources, as catalyzing the ability to do microgrids. Previously it was hard to either do an islanding strategy or a microgrid strategy for a utility, but I think companies like Locus have been able to take that challenge on, the individual challenges of a PV or a storage or so on and so forth. Now you can actually truly do a microgrid. So that's, I think, what previously it was a push. I think microgrids can be one of the pulls, and it's I look to see how microgrids are going to evolve over time. Clearly on the military side there's a lot of need for microgrids, and that investment may actually flow over to the traditional utilities and may drive the market. So that's what I look from a trends perspective.
John, microgrids?
I would add on the original question that I think Hawaii will be a great proxy in the near term to see how it plays out with the solar storage combination. I also think that as tariffs are reformed to represent more wholesale pricing, that real time and particularly in conjunction with solar, that will become more and more prevalent. And I think we'll see that in the near term in Hawaii. So that to me is kind of I think that's going to really be an interesting market to watch over the next just even 6 to 8 months as far as how it evolves, along with some things going on in California.
So what do you think would happen to analytics as a layer or part of distributed PV and storage?
Well, I think they'll become more significant as it relates to more complex tariffs, particularly if you get, our view is that wholesale pricing type fashion will be the future, and I think that having predictive real-time analytics to play in that is significant and will be game-changing.
Sure. So in your opinion, tariffs probably is one of the key drivers to have better predictive analytics?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that I think customers benefit from that. Quite frankly, utilities benefit from that. I think people should be paying for the times that they use the power, and we're seeing more and more of that trend going on.
Great. Rogers, your opinion, and then we open up the floor for
Yeah,
audience.
I actually think it could make quite a difference. If you sort of think of the future of the utility as either sort of more or less like it is today versus maybe this distributed system operator idea that's been floated around versus, a sort of shell of its former self because there's so many people defecting. I think that, that changes 80% of what use cases and values drive the development of analytics. And so I actually think it could have a very big impact on how analytics shake out and the business models develop and all that.
Absolutely. Perfect. Any questions from the audience? Gentlemen here? Or we have mics, right? Third row.
Yeah, hi. A question on storage. Maybe two-part question. One is, do you think that storage is at the beginning of a decline of a cost curve, which could be faster, much faster than in the past? And do you think that adoption will be driven more on the consumer side, business side, utility side? Which side do you think will drive that adoption faster?
So I would say that battery cost deflation is continuing nearly daily. Look, if finance Elon's idea and throw a couple dollars to get it done faster, I'd be all in, because to double the lithium-ion output globally is analogous to my old solar days when the Chinese went heavy, went all in, and what happened to module pricing. So I think we'll continue to see that trend. I think storage cited behind the meter is what we focus on. We think it's a good solution. We think it's the cheapest, fastest, cleanest solution. But look, the utilities also want to own assets, and they get a little leery of owning assets behind the meter. So it depends upon which utility you're speaking of and which strategy. But I think there's a fit for all of them. So yes, and I think utility and customer sided. Consumer is a little bit difficult because, at least for the way I pencil it, I don't see the economics today. I mean, lithium-ion battery is $20,000 in your residence as a backup storage device, which effectively is what it would be today without other ancillary services that you could do. As those come about, I think you have an opportunity to arbitrage and make the economics more compelling.
Yeah, and I guess just briefly on that, I don't think storage, I'll speak first to lithium ion, which is the main chemistry in play today. I don't think that's on the same kind of cost curve that solar was on, because it doesn't share the silicon economics that solar PV did with, with semiconductors. But it's definitely on a cost curve. And then what's the bigger unknown to me is how these other chemistries could come in and change that, shift that curve down faster. And I just don't have enough visibility yet to know. And adoption, I think I agree with John. And in some ways, I squint at the IT industry and see that buffering happens at almost every level of the network. And so, the question of where adoption will happen first is, it will play out. But I think ultimately, storage will be present in all those places.
I just want to add one quick thing. So one of the trends that we are seeing is that the battery technology is now much more generic than just utilities. So truly, to what Roger said, it has a different cost curve, but hopefully, the same technology, lithium-ion technology being used in cars, being used in the utility industry is going to help bring the overall cost down, just because the volumes go up. But that's a trend to watch. I think to John's earlier point, I think the community level might be more prevalent initially than the residential level at that point.
So if I can add a point here, obviously costs are coming down, but when you talk about deployments, you have to think about the economics, which includes the benefit side. So it would really depend on how the market rules are evolving. Aggregation, obviously, we talked about aggregation. You have to think about what the PUCs in certain jurisdictions are pushing for as well. At least early on in some of these states, we are looking at utility scale storage, but then a lot more utility scale storage, along with cost curves coming down, and models like STEM, we potentially are going to see the distributed side of PV or distributed side of storage grow as well. So it's going to be it's a question of when and how fast. I think Byron, you had a question, and then.
Hi, Byron Washam from UC San Diego. A question for John and Michael. What would be the game changer impact if you had a high degree of certainty of solar forecasting in your charge-discharge algorithms for PV integrated storage?
Yeah. So yeah.
It's so easy, we both jumped on it.
Yeah. So we actually worked on solar forecasting for some time, and our virtual radiance engine is one of the key precursors to that. It does a snapshot of cloud cover, and it moves and through the vector analysis. We feel pretty good about the basic science. So it's a great question in terms of PV and storage analytics. It's going to be absolutely critical from that system level. What we're seeing today, though, is though there's a lot of interest in forecasting, there's not a lot of interest in really paying for forecasting outside of specific programs and some kind of more, there's some with universities and others. So I would love to have a better forecasting engine, and I think that it's going to be worth a lot someday to handle the system level problems. The question is when.
I second that. I mean, the monetization piece is what we talk about internally at STEM around that. And it's early for us as far as working with the solar PV side and storage. As I said earlier, there's not a clear solution yet. You know, it's interesting, there's not that clean power finance model where if you're a solar installer and you want to go out and utilize storage, there's not a IRR or a cost estimator site in existence, and we're working on some things there. But he's much deeper in that than we are at this point, and we're coming up to speed and would love to talk to you more if you have ideas that could help collaborate together on that.
Bud, you had a question there?
Thank you. So I'm going to make an assumption, and I'd like to see what the panel reaction is to this assumption, which is that the title of this talk may actually be missing a third. And the third is the actual demand itself that you're connecting yourself into, and how analytics will play into the combination of distributed PV storage and demand. Demand meaning the customer load.
Load, okay.
So I'll take a first crack at this. You're exactly right. I mean, you have to have, there's a supply side and there's a demand side. And, a typical operational system is balancing the supply and demand at any point in time. So, I mean, there is a regulation angle to this. The demand response market is much more mature at the wholesale level, and at the retail level, it's still questionable at this point. If you look at Japan and what they are doing, their deregulation is going to be much more in line, where all of these three will be optimized at the same time. They've opened the market out to aggregation models that allow for this level of optimization. North America has to rethink. It was well ahead of everyone else. It has to rejig its models a little bit to make it easy to monetize the retail side demand response as well. So I think you're right. I mean, you can't have a lot of these supplies come on without a proper understanding of the demand and where the demands are and how the demand is going to be met through these DER resources at that point.
Any other thoughts? We have 2 more minutes to go. One last question, if anyone's keen. All right. I'll take an opportunity here. So we sort of stepping back a bit, where do you see the role of analytics again in converting consumers to prosumers, and probably goes along the lines of what does distributed PV plus storage and solar plus storage combination look like, given that the analytics was advanced enough or intelligent enough to facilitate that. Mike,
I'll start. So
default.
So in terms of turning consumers into prosumers, I mean, one of the things which we've learned is that a lot of times consumers, whether residential or even commercial, they just want things to work. They have a lot of different motivations, and I think that there's a lot of both residential as well as commercial and industrial customers in our space who would love to have this combination, to be more independent, have resiliency, et cetera. I think where analytics stand for them is they want it to be less expensive, and I think a lot of analytics from our perspective is better management, therefore lower expense, and they want it to be smarter in a seamless way. So it's kind of more cost effective and seamless. From the consumer perspective, I think it's kind of, that's how I would look at it. A lot of times, I mean, I know I get very excited about a lot of the minutia, but I know a lot of our customers sure don't. So if that makes any sense.
Sure. One last comment here.
I would say the economics piece that I mentioned earlier has got to be there, and I fully agree. I think the ability to have a light touch automated system for people, and the output of savings is a good model, but right now I struggle with it from at least a storage standpoint at a commercial level.
Sure, got it. Excellent. Thank you so much for your insights here. Pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thank you.